Grace's cold words stung like ice. I stood there in shock, my 2-year-old daughter, Tracy, clinging to my leg. We were in the hallway of the apartment I once thought of as home, but now it felt like a stranger's house, Grace's house. My husband, Jim, had just left for his overseas assignment in Japan, and without hesitation, his mother had kicked us out. She didn't even flinch. "You can't do this," I pleaded, but Grace was already closing the door, her face expressionless. "Please, I have nowhere else to go." But it was too late. The door shut in my face, and the rain outside began to pour down harder. Holding Tracy close, I stepped out onto the street. My phone was dead, and my wallet was still inside the apartment. I was stranded, and as I stood there in the cold, reality began to sink in. Grace wasn't going to open that door again. With nowhere to go, I walked to the nearby park. The rain was relentless, soaking through my clothes, but I tried to shelter Tracy as best as I could. We found a bench under a small roofed area, but it didn't do much to keep us dry. As I sat there staring at the dark sky, my mind raced. What now? Where could we go? I hadn't spoken to my parents in weeks. They loved Tracy, but they lived hours away, and I had no way to get there tonight. The thought of walking with my daughter in this storm for 3 hours was unbearable. Yet staying here in the cold rain wasn't an option either. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I saw 2 lights approaching from a distance. At first, I thought it was a car passing by, but the lights were coming straight toward us. As they got closer, I realized it was a police car. The flashing lights sent a wave of panic through me. What were they doing here? The car pulled up beside the bench, and 2 officers stepped out, their expressions serious but calm. "Ma'am, are you Olive? Is this your daughter, Tracy?" one of them asked. Surprised that they knew my name, I nodded. "Yes, that's me," I replied, my voice shaky. "Please come with us to the station," the officer said. His tone wasn't threatening, but the command in his voice made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. I stood up, holding Tracy tightly. "Why? What's going on?" The officer didn't answer directly. "We'll explain everything once we get to the station. Please come with us." Reluctantly, I followed them to the patrol car. Tracy was shivering in my arms, and I was too cold and wet to think straight. All I knew was that whatever was happening, it couldn't be worse than sitting in the park in the freezing rain. As we arrived at the police station, I was still confused and frightened. The officers led me inside, offering towels to dry off and a change of clothes for Tracy and me. I sat down in the waiting area, still wondering why I had been brought here. My thoughts were interrupted when the door opened, and a familiar figure walked in. It was my uncle. "Uncle Mark?" I asked, surprised to see him. "What are you doing here?" He sat down beside me, looking concerned. "Olive, Jim called me from Japan. He was worried about you and Tracy. He asked me to keep an eye on things while he's away, especially with Grace acting the way she's been." I was stunned. Jim knew something was wrong? He hadn't mentioned it when we talked last, and I didn't want to burden him while he was so far away. But somehow, he knew things were falling apart. "Jim's worried that Grace might not be treating you well," Uncle Mark continued. "When I drove by the park and saw you sitting in the rain with Tracy, I knew something was wrong. That's why I called the police." Tears welled up in my eyes as I realized how close we'd come to spending the night out in the cold. If it weren't for Uncle Mark, who knew what might have happened to us? As we talked, another door opened and Grace walked in. She looked annoyed, as if being at the police station was a huge inconvenience for her. She didn't even glance at me or Tracy. "Why do I have to be here?" Grace grumbled, sitting down across from us. "This is ridiculous. I haven't done anything wrong." I stared at her in disbelief. "You kicked me and Tracy out of the house, in the middle of a storm." Grace shrugged. "The house belongs to Jim, not you. Now that he's gone, I should have my space." Uncle Mark cut in, his voice firm. "Actually, Grace, the apartment is in Olive's name. Jim made sure of that when they bought it. You don't have the right to kick them out." Grace's face froze for a moment. She hadn't known that. I could see the realization hit her, but she quickly masked her surprise. "Well, that doesn't change anything," she snapped. "I'm his mother. I should be the one in charge while he's gone." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Grace had always been difficult, but this was a new level of cruelty. She had never cared for Tracy or me, and now she was trying to take over everything while Jim was overseas. The police officer who had brought us in stepped forward. "This situation could have serious legal implications, Grace. You can't just throw Olive and her child out of their own home, especially in such dangerous conditions. We're recommending that Olive seek legal counsel." A lawyer? I hadn't even considered that things might escalate to this point. But it was clear now that Grace wasn't going to back down without a fight. I knew I needed to protect Tracy and myself, and if that meant getting a lawyer, so be it. Uncle Mark nodded in agreement. "I know a good lawyer who can help you, Olive. We'll get this sorted out." Grace, on the other hand, was fuming. "A lawyer? This is outrageous. I haven't done anything wrong. I just want some peace and quiet in my own home." But it wasn't her home. It was mine. And I was finally beginning to understand that I needed to stand up for myself. For too long, I had let Grace push me around, believing that I had to endure it for Jim's sake. But now, with him halfway across the world, I couldn't afford to let things continue as they were. I looked at Uncle Mark and nodded. "Let's talk to that lawyer." The next few days were a whirlwind of consultations and paperwork. The lawyer, a kind woman named Sarah, explained the legal steps we could take. It wasn't going to be easy to get Grace out of the apartment, but I had the upper hand since the property was in my name. If necessary, we could look into placing Grace in a care facility, given her age and health issues. But I hesitated at the thought. Despite everything, I didn't want to force Grace into a situation that felt like abandonment. Jim was still her son, and I knew he wouldn't want her treated cruelly, no matter how difficult she had been. I had to find a balance between protecting myself and not becoming like her. I called Jim, explaining everything that had happened. He was shocked, but supportive. "I had no idea things had gotten this bad, Olive. I'm coming back to the US as soon as I can. We need to figure this out together." But with his work commitments in Japan, Jim couldn't return right away. That meant I had to handle things on my own for a little while longer. 1 week later, Jim finally arrived home. He looked exhausted from the long flight, but determined to set things right. We sat down together, ready to confront Grace and discuss our options. When we told Grace that we were considering moving her to a care facility, she exploded with anger. "You're not putting me in a home. How dare you even suggest that?" Jim tried to calm her down, but Grace was furious. "I raised you, Jim. How could you side with her?" she spat, glaring at me as if I were the enemy. But Jim remained firm. "Mom, Olive and Tracy are my family too. I can't let things continue like this. If you can't live with us peacefully, we have no choice but to make other arrangements." Grace refused to listen. She accused me of trying to turn Jim against her, claiming that I was the reason her son was abandoning her. But Jim wasn't abandoning her. He was just trying to protect his family. The situation reached a breaking point. After several heated discussions, Jim and I realized that there was no way we could continue living with Grace. The tension in the apartment was unbearable, and it was affecting Tracy too. She had started to become anxious, picking up on the stress between the adults around her. In the end, we made a difficult decision. We would sell the apartment and move to Japan as a family. Jim's job in Japan was long-term, and it didn't make sense to keep the apartment in the US, especially with Grace's behavior becoming more erratic. When we told Grace about our decision, she was livid. "You can't sell this apartment. This is my home," she shouted. But the truth was, it wasn't hers to claim. "We're leaving, Mom," Jim said quietly. "If you don't want to live in a facility, you'll need to find somewhere else to stay." Grace's anger quickly turned to despair. "You can't leave me here alone," she sobbed. But the damage was already done. Her refusal to cooperate had driven us to this point, and there was no turning back. In the days leading up to our departure, I arranged for Grace to move into a nearby care facility. It wasn't ideal, but it was the best option given the circumstances. Jim felt guilty about the whole situation, but he knew it was necessary for our family to move forward. On the day we left for Japan, we visited Grace at the facility one last time. She was angry, accusing me of ruining her life. "You'll regret this," she hissed as we said our goodbyes. But I knew that wasn't true. Moving to Japan felt like a fresh start. Jim's company had arranged a comfortable apartment for us, and Tracy and I began adjusting to our new life. We enrolled in language classes, made new friends, and started exploring the vibrant culture around us. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Grace remained in the care facility, though we received regular updates about her condition. She wasn't happy, but she was safe. Jim and I stayed in contact with her, but the distance helped ease the tension between us. Tracy was thriving in her new environment, and I began to rediscover my own passions, finding a part-time job at a local cafe. Life in Japan wasn't without its challenges, but as a family, we were stronger than ever. Jim had become more present, more involved in our daily lives, and we communicated better than we ever had before. Looking back, I realized that standing up for myself had been the turning point. For too long, I had let Grace control my life, but now I had taken it back. I wasn't just Jim's wife or Tracy's mother. I was Olive, and I was stronger than I'd ever known. And for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace.